Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here and I'm back with the Game Week 7 cheat sheet. As you guys might know, the unfortunate real life world event is that the Queen has passed within the United Kingdom, so my condolences to her and her family. Fortunately, this is a tough time for some people. I understand people have differing opinions on the monarchy, but I won't speak more about that. It does have impacts potential in FPL as well. Unfortunately, it might mean that the fixtures will be cancelled in Game Week 7 to pay respect to her passing. So that is to be determined, and that will probably be determined tomorrow morning. We'll see what happens. As far as what we know for now, Game Week 8, Crystal Palace versus Brighton, that fixture has been postponed simply due to a rail strike next weekend. So we know that that fixture is going to be voided in a sense, and that will be replayed into a double game week later in the future. So that's why you're seeing a black box now. As I said, Game Week 7 could be postponed, but let's just continue expecting that the fixtures in Game Week 7 will continue as they are. As far as the 4.5 to 4.9 midfielders, you have someone like Bailey, who actually is new to the cheat sheet and also rises this week. He is someone who's exceptionally interesting because we know Bailey is underpriced as an asset, especially if he gets to play consistently for this Villa team, regardless of their form. And we saw that exactly in the City game where he was able to strike a great crack at goal. What I'm concerned with, of course, is his minutes and whether he gets consistent starts with Gerrard. I do think he has been one of the top players for Villa this season. We saw that in the preseason, and we saw the signs that a fit Bailey could be a devastating player in the Premier League, and it really does remain to be seen whether Gerrard consistently starts him. But at this sort of price, at 4.7, I think he's a major steal. A lot of us have had upgraded price in terms of our teams, and now we can easily afford someone on the second bench option, especially in a 4-3-3 formation now. So if you're moving to that kind of template formation, I think Bailey is exactly the option that you'd like to get as your second midfielder. 5.0 to 5.9. Gross and McAllister both look exceptionally interesting. McAllister, obviously a little bit fluky because it's mostly through set pieces. He's not interesting in open play whatsoever. I mean, even that amazing thunderbolt of a goal versus Leicester actually came off a direct set piece and a great strike. You're basically banking on a player to score screamers every week or a penalty. And the rate at which Brighton have had and received penalties so far is around 50%. That's not going to maintain itself for the rest of the season. We haven't even seen penalty numbers that high in the past. As far as Gross, he's also someone who's impacted simply by the Game Week 8 postponement of the Palace fixture. And with Potter out, I would say this is a week, unfortunately, where no Brighton asset's ever going to hold that title of tier 1 simply due to the way fixtures are set out and also the loss of a manager. I do think the Bournemouth fixture is a lovely game, so that's a great fixture that you'd like to keep your Brighton assets for, but moving forwards, it is time to go away from these assets and actually look elsewhere, in my opinion, unless we can actually see Brighton find a little bit of steadiness and someone to steady the ship, such as Adam Lallana, but whether that actually is going to be possible, that remains to be seen. However, the team on paper still looks very good. I think Potter has built something consistently year on year, and even though they have had some massive outgoings this year, some of the new recruits still look very, very good. And ultimately, I do think they're a very well-drilled team. However, the fixtures get tough. Liverpool and Tottenham immediately after that postponement, and it therefore is, I think, the time to jump ship off of the Brighton assets after Game Week 7, if it even happens. Souček is someone who also joins the cheat sheet. He's an interesting asset because with Souček, you have a player who obviously is someone that people target for set pieces, and West Ham have a beautiful run of games. Potentially, he could be someone to fill in a little bit of a hole in your team. If you're looking for a budget enabler who has a great run of fixtures, doesn't have postponements, it could be Souček. Unfortunately, that's sort of the state of the 5.5 midfielders right now. I believe he's 5.4. And he does hold some value. I mean, he did actually score a goal in open play thanks to a Bergkamp-like assist from Antonio, but I think you are banking on Souček and his ability to actually get onto the score sheet through scoring headers and so on and so forth. He has been involved. Ironically, he actually has better XG per 90 stats, mostly because of that goal involvement and that direct goal he scored over Bowen, but that kind of tells you the tale of the tape. I do think this West Ham team are building some confidence and some form. You can see that their expected numbers when it comes to the expected goals created on a kind of per match basis has increased in the last few weeks, and potentially with Paqueta finding a way into this team, Paqueta could be someone who also joins the cheat sheet and could be a great option. But for now, I think Souček is someone that I probably have a little bit more faith in if you're just looking for a budget enabler for now, especially as a replacement to McAllister. 6.0 to 6.9, we're now moving into the territory where Rashford has ascended towards that tier 1 level, and nothing else has really changed because of the impacts of the Brighton fixtures, because Leeds do have a tough game versus United, and also because of the impacts of Saint Maximin and his injury being undetermined, and Odegaard, I would say as well. Unfortunately, his situation is a little bit weird because Martinelli still kind of holds that slot in the team, and I do think that Saka will actually find time to have his expected numbers increase as he is developing a little bit of form, and I think he will find much better spaces than an Odegaard, and then it becomes a question of, do you want to even keep triple Arsenal assets as their fixtures turn tough? I have made the Liverpool and the Tottenham games white fixtures. These games are played at home, but what does concern me, of course, is that those are going to be games where we probably won't see Arsenal be as high scoring as they have been so far. And at the same time, I do think that there will be some defensive fragilities versus some tough teams such as Tottenham and Liverpool, especially a Liverpool team that will have that international break to potentially rediscover some ways to actually play a little bit of better football, have Thiago integrate into the side, and have Matip fit as well and playing. So those kind of things will probably change the way this Liverpool team starts to play. They might even be able to incorporate someone like Arthur into the team, and that could change the dynamic of things, and therefore the fixtures for Arsenal do still look quite tough on paper. As far as Rashford, though, just going back to the main man there, he is probably the only asset around this price point that I would say is very, very much worth a transfer this week, irrespective of how tough the Crystal Palace game is and the Man City one too. What we know with Man City is that this season that they have been defensively fragile when it comes to the counterattacks. They can concede. We've seen that time and time in the past versus a team like Spurs who always set up to counter. This is exactly how United plan to play, with Rashford sometimes going late in games, playing that left wing role, but still becoming that kind of last man who runs behind the ball and looks for a kind of slip through pass from someone like Eriksen or Bruno. As far as Crystal Palace, we have even seen someone like Rashford do well in the centre forward position. I think the Leicester game, yes, Leicester are terrible, but I would say Crystal Palace's defence aren't necessarily much better this season, and the stats do show that. I do think he could be the one to also slip men through. So we saw, for example, the Sancho goal, a good example of that in the Leicester game, where Rashford is at least capable of making that final third pass as long as he is able to receive it on time and actually pick out a pass that's quite simple. When it comes to consistent 1-2s, actually building up a lot of passages of play, I think Rashford is a little bit worse at that. But being able to find just the right pass and be a little bit more efficient, I think Rashford has actually found a little bit more consistency this season, which is why he's risen towards the top. And Martinelli, we've talked about him week on week, so no real reason to discuss why he's such a top asset. I have kept Harrison actually and dropped him and separated him from Sinister, and the main reason for that is simply because of Harrison getting 45 minutes in the previous game. Wasn't a good look. Was an early sub simply due to, I think, his lack of performance, and that is a bit of a warning sign. I think with Sinister, at least you're thinking that his minutes will increase as he finds a bit more form, because he seems like the most lethal man in this Leeds team. Whereas with Harrison, I would say, despite the creativity numbers being really good, it's not a good sign, I would say, with the manager ever substituting a player at 45 minutes, unless I guess you're Phil Foden. Moving on to the part 2, the midfielders, we have some changes, unfortunately, with the 7.0 to 7.8 position. And as I've been talking about in recent weeks, we have been seeing a lot of great value assets come out with the 6.5 territory towards the 6.9 range, and less so from the 7.0s. I feel like Bernardo and Gundogan are those two assets that are not going to play such an offensive role for the City team this season. I think, especially looking at the recent games, the narrative that Gundogan could potentially play as a second striker is increasingly being false. There will be times, of course, where he will be, I think, encouraged to make those runs, but he is almost playing like a second holding role for this team, and Bernardo is almost being stretched out wide as a right wing back at times. And I feel like that might change, of course, with the Walker injury and how Cancelo is being deployed. That might allow Bernardo to move towards the midfield at times and allow Cancelo to overlap too and find more goal involvements himself. But for now, I haven't really been too impressed with Bernardo, but I definitely have been much less so impressed by Gundogan, so he is the one who falls between the two Man City midfielders. As far as Sancho and Antony, I haven't really made a decision between the two assets for now. I think Sancho is someone who hasn't gotten too many minutes over the course of the season. Potentially it is a question of fitness. Antony is someone who did score versus Arsenal but was subbed off. We did see from the Erik ten Hag interview that he didn't have too much time to train. So I do think that his minutes will actually trend up in the future. What I don't like about Sancho is you have the competition with someone like Rashford, who does seem nailed in this team, especially now that Anthony Martial is still away from the team. And I would probably have a little bit more justification going for Rashford for the time being than going for a much more expensive asset in Sancho or Antony. And I feel like that's the kind of situation that we're dealing with right now with FPL. There's no reason to really move into these assets. They're tier 2 because I do think this United team could absolutely capitulate leads, especially in game week 8. But with so many tough fixtures kind of sliced in between, and with Rashford being cheaper, I can't really put Sancho or Antony as top options for now. I do also need to see a little bit more from Antony himself. As far as Zaha, he falls unfortunately as well due to the game week 8 postponement. Nothing else really, because he actually does seem to be one of the best assets in the game. Potentially you could revisit him at game week 10. As far as the 7.9 plus players, we have someone like Saka who does rise alongside Bowen. Saka rises simply because of the Everton game. I do also like this short-term window here where, especially with Diaz potentially being rotated versus Wolves, I would actually expect that Diaz played so well versus Napoli that he has to start for this Liverpool team going forwards, and I do think he's going to get 65 minutes. So that's kind of why I've kept Diaz as a top option, but Saka is, within all the 8.0 midfielders, someone who has a fantastic fixture in game week 7 and game week 8, and we have to consider the impact of the wild card very soon. A lot of the player base will be moving towards these sort of fixtures of wild cards, 7/8/9, and Saka is one of the best assets to own at this time being, because you do potentially avoid the game week 9 game and the game week 10 game, which are tough matches with Tottenham and Liverpool. What I do like about Saka too is he is someone who has found a little bit more form. We are seeing him actually challenge the goalkeeper more, challenge opposing defenders, and actually find his way and navigate through them to create goal scoring opportunities for himself. And that's sort of the confidence that we've seen coming from Rashford this season when you compare to a dismal last season for him. Saka, someone who didn't start the season off very hot, did have a great preseason, was one of the leading goal scorers for this Arsenal team, and I do think he will take up that mantle very soon. Plus, you could even have him driving and getting penalties, which I think he's actually still the best person in that team to actually be able to get that chance. As far as Foden, tough fixture versus Tottenham, but he does belong absolutely at the top. We've seen it in especially the Champions League game versus Sevilla as well. I think he is nailed for this team for the time being. He is providing so much, and if you listen to the post-match press conference from the Sevilla game, the Champions League match, Pep Guardiola just continuously speaks so pridefully of Foden and what he can do as an asset. He's someone who continues to drive the ball forward, always goes for chances, always fights for the ball, and that's kind of what Pep likes, especially even at a time where Foden might not be the most precise, might not be the most efficient on the ball, but I think he is slowly finding some form, and he definitely deserves to be a top asset for now. Maddison is someone who's exceptionally interesting because the fixtures are so good for Leicester, so you'd expect that when they actually find a little bit of form as a team, and potentially they could if they have a great result versus Aston Villa, but going beyond, let's say, the Tottenham game would be a great opportunity to jump onto an asset like Maddison, especially since he has accumulated a price fall as well so far. So it is nice to move into, especially if you're, let's say, no longer so confident in someone like Luis Diaz and you're looking for a direct replacement at that sort of price point, who does seem to be on an uptrend based on fixtures. As far as Kulusevski, he is someone who falls because Tottenham do have a tough run of games in the immediate future, and I feel like Richarlison playing so well does sort of put his position immediately at threat. A lot of people have suggested that Son could be the one who would be sitting minutes, but I feel like Son is actually someone who is upticking in form, whereas Kulusevski, apart from that kind of first blowout game of the season and a few moments of magic, does seem to be downtrending. And I feel like the ideal front three for Spurs for the time being could potentially be that sort of Son, Richarlison, Kane lineup, even though they have been quite dire from an attacking perspective lately. Bowen is someone who rises, and I feel like this is just to respect how great the fixtures are for West Ham. His underlying numbers are abysmal, to be honest, and for an 8.5 asset, someone who has dropped tremendously from the start of the season, he doesn't really hold his price well. I feel like you have to absolutely wait and see for Bowen to actually start finding some form before you even dare move into him. I definitely wouldn't wildcard into someone like Bowen without even seeing a single goal involvement in the season so far. But that's the position he's in. He does have a great run of fixtures, and this could be the time where he finds some form. 10 plus assets. It's so weird here that I have put Sterling as a top asset. And I feel like this is because if you are moving into a wild card, I feel like I'd be a little bit more sure about how attacking Chelsea can be under Graham Potter. Graham Potter is a manager who does actually favor being able to play free-flowing attacking football. Quite a market change, I would say, from Tuchel, who sometimes I would say is a little bit stubborn when it comes to making sure that there is solidity at the back first before he incorporates any sort of attacking measures and any sort of freedom within the attacking system. So far from what we've seen in this season is that Sterling is still the key player for Chelsea, and he has been absolutely carrying their attack. I feel like if Potter is able to unlock a little bit more from the midfield of Chelsea, Sterling immediately becomes one of the best options in the game at his price point. We've already seen historically great seasons from him, and especially since you can even afford a freemium draft, which I've showcased already, not even going for someone like Sterling who's cheaper, I do feel like Sterling does guarantee quite a bit for his price if you have some faith in Potter, especially post-Liverpool game. It's a tough situation now with Salah, De Bruyne, and Son. I feel like the reason why I've dropped Salah is just to make sure that I would put towards a game week 8/9 wildcard that these players are around the same level and could give you similar dividends. Someone like Son has been vastly underperforming his expected numbers. He has actually looked better on the ball lately. So when you compare, let's say, his game weeks 1 to 3 fixtures and him not taking his chances like he used to in the past and not being clinical, not finding the right pass, I would say Son has actually found those troubling pains and gone past them. And I feel like he is ready to have a haul. He is very imminent to closing in on that because the form has increased. If you look at, for example, the West Ham game where he was denied a goal because the own goal was scored instead by Thilo Kehrer, that's a good opportunity to say that Son will find hauls, especially versus a very leaky Leicester defense. With De Bruyne, the only reason why I've actually rated him as a yellow asset for now is because of that Tottenham game. I feel like by next week, we're going to have to re-rise De Bruyne, mostly because of the change of landscape of, let's say, Salah and this Liverpool team underperforming, therefore meaning that De Bruyne actually does somewhat guarantee his price as a second premium in the game. He has been very consistent so far, and I think the only worry De Bruyne is rest. With Salah, you have a Liverpool team that's been vastly underperforming, and I think they had market improvements when Thiago stepped onto the field for around 20 minutes versus Napoli. But there's a big difference, right? Playing versus a team that is 4-0 up versus you, who's looking to actually consolidate on the score and the kind of advantage that they've built. So it's very different to say, oh, Liverpool are able to play well as long as Thiago finds his way back into the team. I think Thiago is simply not the only solution for this Liverpool team. And therefore, I don't think that's enough to say that Salah is going to stay as a green asset. I think there are much more damning problems with this team. Trent, Fabinho, even relying on or having to rely on Milner, Andrew Robertson dropping off. These sorts of things have impacted how Liverpool are playing. In general, most of the players do look very lethargic, and the team is just not on the same page. And I don't think Thiago is the only solution, which is exactly why I've dropped Salah towards the level of the other assets. With Sterling, I just feel like there's much more potential for him to rise in the near future. Whereas with Liverpool, I feel like it's still a wait and see. I need to see some good form before I'm even concerned about going into Liverpool assets, because their fixtures will actually get very tough until around game weeks 12 and 13. Moving on to the forwards, you have some impacts here, especially to someone like Welbeck, who does miss out in game week 8. As far as Solanke, you have him rising once again, so he has risen from a complete avoid in the past towards the Nottingham Forest game being a rise. And I do feel like Solanke is going to be the focal point of this Bournemouth team. The question is, of course, even though that they do have a relatively decent fixture schedule, can this Bournemouth team really muster up the attacks that you actually want to have and actually even spend bank on within your team? Simply put, their expected goal numbers are at the bottom of the league, and that's even after getting a chance to play versus Nottingham Forest. And I feel like their goals in the Nottingham Forest game, despite scoring 3, were still very tough chances. One of them was a absolute supreme worldie, and I don't have the confidence to say that when they're playing some of the more composed and compact defenses, such as a Newcastle, such as a Brighton, or even a Brentford, who are a little bit more open this season, admittedly, Solanke is going to be an interesting asset. I do feel like Mitrovic is by far and away the asset you want to touch around these price points, and it is absolutely worth the kind of price sacrifice there. Mbeumo, someone who drops, and I mean, there's just no real interest there because the clear talisman is Tony, and I feel like a lot of these substitutions will go towards Mbeumo's way, whereas Tony is someone who could still benefit and even provide in late game scenarios where we have seen a lot of Brentford super subs come in and do well. As far as the 7.0 to 7.9 territory, not much has changed other than a Watkins rise. It just simply is the case that they do have a great run of fixtures going forwards. Teams like Leeds, teams like Leicester, who are actually white fixtures here, could arguably be considered as green because of how open their defense has been. And this is a decent run to actually really embark on Watkins. But do you really want to do that when other players like Tony have been performing so well and other players like Isaac have equally, I would say, good runs of games? Probably not. And I feel like that's the situation that you're maybe at odds with. And simply when it comes down to it, I think individual class, Watkins is just not there when you compare it to someone like Tony. With Bamford, he does become an interesting differential this week, specifically for that Nottingham Forest fixture. For anyone targeting a Game Week 8 wildcard, as an example, I do think Bamford could be a great one Game Week punt before you actually move into maybe more trusted assets, less injury-prone assets as well within Tony and Isaac. With 8.0 to 8.9, Firmino is someone who drops, and Richarlison is someone who does join the cheat sheet. I feel like Richarlison is someone that I mentioned specifically because of Kulusevski falling as well, is someone that you'd actually like to rise on the cheat sheet because of his individual form and how talismanic, I would say, he has been for this Tottenham team so far. He has been quintessential, I would say, to creating these attacks really from nothing when this Spurs team haven't been as creative as we expected. And with Firmino, unfortunately, with Darwin back and even Darwin starting in the previous week, there's already signs to say that I would say Darwin will potentially project and move towards being the better asset, especially with Firmino getting the start in the Champions League game versus Napoli. It probably suggests that we're going to see a Darwin starting this weekend, and that's simply the tale of the tape between the two. I feel like you'll see maybe some ebbs and flows during the season between Firmino and Darwin, but I feel like Darwin is going to be eventually the one who wins out, and for now, I'm kind of putting the balances within Darwin's favor. As far as someone like Haaland and Kane, still two top assets in the game. They have a mirror matchup this week. And yes, whilst Haaland is the absolute best asset in FPL, it doesn't mean that Kane is any worse when it comes to a second premium. And that's why Kane deserves to be a top option. And nothing really will change because other players within the midfield positions just aren't delivering at Kane's level. And that's going to be the forwards. And now moving on to the defenders, we're basically seeing what is a bloodbath, and effectively I would say the death of the five at the back at FPL. While I still think that we might see some value come out of some Chelsea players, especially let's say if Potter seems to prefer one of Cucurella or Chilwell, which I think is actually a complete TBD, and then also maybe Fofana arising as a top option. For now, there just doesn't seem to be a five at the back formation that I would really like to employ, especially since the Brighton players do suffer twofold from the Potter removal from management, and then also the impact of the postponement in Game Week 8. That has simply gutted, I would say, most of the interesting defensive options in the league, alongside some of the tough fixtures for both Liverpool and Spurs, even arguably Arsenal, and then I would say the impacts of Newcastle have made it a little bit more interesting. But for now, I think the landscape of FPL is such that only really City and Newcastle defenders, and maybe even cheaper 4.4, 4.5 defenders are now interesting and deserve a place in our teams. You could even argue that players like Trent could exit our teams, but I feel like he still is close to being essential in FPL. Yes, the performances from him individually are poor. If you watch any kind of highlight tapes or any of the goals scored against Liverpool this season, you'll probably be very dismayed with Trent, but that simply has always been Trent. And I feel like we've seen Trent succeed as an FPL asset in spite of those kind of weaknesses within him as a player, and not much has really changed. It really does come down to whether, let's say, if the Wolves game happens, whether or not this Liverpool team is able to cooperate and actually play a decent level of football with Thiago in, and what we can expect with Trent doing well as a result. If, let's say, the Wolves game doesn't happen, then I think it's a big question, because people will be heading into 8/9 wildcards, potentially even wanting to get rid of Trent because of the Chelsea game and then the onset of fixtures such as Arsenal and Man City. So that's kind of the landscape of the defenders. Nico Williams suffers a drop. Nottingham Forest simply just aren't keeping clean sheets this season. I really struggle to see how they'll find any sort of form until, let's say, the Christmas break. As far as Dalot, you're looking at a player who is the most interesting asset and the only rise in the cheat sheet this week for the defenders, and that's simply because this United team do actually look quite organized. And as I've been saying, Dalot is an absolute bonus points magnet. Even before they conceded versus Arsenal, he actually was #1 on bonus points, and that kind of shows you what kind of an asset he could be on a good day for United, and especially since they have some relatively easy fixtures amongst some tough ones, such as the City game. I think because of his pricing, you have the justification now, especially on a wild card where you hopefully have a deeper bench, to find fixtures like the City game to bench Dalot and actually play a midfielder like Bailey as your second midfielder, or even have Andreas playing that sort of week. And that's sort of the value of going for 4.5s at this point in FPL. You could even consider going to a 3-4-3 or 4-3-3 formation, but I definitely think there are 4-3-3 formations that include, let's say, a double up of Dalot and Fofana that could be super interesting. Dunk and Estupiñán fall. Estupiñán didn't actually get to start in the previous game, but we do know there's a change in manager. We'll see what Lallana does with management. Dunk is someone who I think is a great asset, of course, but with the postponement has to fall. Brentford defenders, I do think they're actually playing much more open this season, and that does alarm me. I would say that they are quite chaotic right now. They are almost like a quintessential both teams to score team, and that doesn't bode well really for the defenders unless you're able to, I guess, pull off a masterclass and consistently pick which Brentford defender gets involved. With 5.0 to 5.4 options, you have someone like Walker who has dropped, and that actually conversely does push up Cancelo and actually keep him as a top asset. Cancelo was almost in a wait and see territory, and I think a lot of managers have already preemptively moved out of Cancelo, whereas we have warned on the cheat sheet that is not worth it. Cancelo had a great game in the Champions League, playing versus Sevilla, got 2 assists in open play. And I really feel like the Cancelo of old, the one who is going to get a lot of bonus points because he's so involved in Man City's plays, is back if he gets to play this right back position during Walker's injury period. As far as Trent and James, I still have kept them there. James is super interesting to me because I think he'll be getting consistent starts at right wing back under Graham Potter. As far as Trent, you have the Wolves game, hopefully, and then you can actually wait and see whether you want to move off of Trent. But for now, I still think because of the kind of sword that he possesses as an attacking football player for Liverpool, he still deserves to be a top option. Perisic and Diaz are at a weird spot. I feel like the City defense just isn't worth doubling up for now. The fixtures are a little bit tough, and ultimately, if you want to go for Diaz, you're probably better off with Ederson long term. With someone like Perisic, you do have him, I think, as a better option when it comes to game week 11. And this kind of short-term horizon for Spurs don't look super interesting because of potential rest, the strength of Ryan Sessegnon and how well he's been playing himself, and then some of the tough matchups, as I said, with City and Arsenal. Robertson and Van Dijk also fall. Robertson has been rotated a lot with Costa Simicas, so that's a huge concern. And with Van Dijk, I'm not really seeing the value of going for an asset like him. I'd much rather go for Matip if I actually knew he was fit, because that would actually save you money when going for a Liverpool centre-back. And that's pretty much what the defenders look like for now. Last but not least, we have the goalkeepers, and there's been a massive increase in drops. Sanchez due to the Brighton postponement. Raya, unfortunately, as I said, due to Brentford playing much more attacking football and much more open style of football than in the previous year. And I really feel like that has been shown within the shots on target that they've been facing. And ultimately, I don't think that they're a quality enough defense to actually be someone like Pope, who, despite conceding so many shots, actually doesn't give away as many expected goals conceded because the shots aren't actually in good quality positions. As far as Henderson, as I said, with Nottingham Forest, they just look like a team that won't find enough form, enough gelling to be worthwhile as an asset. I think Henderson unfortunately got some pretty lucky, unfortunate hauls with the penalties, and you're almost banking on that on a week-to-week basis for an asset that effectively performs similarly to Ward, right, at a much more expensive price. And that's sort of the situation with the 4.5 to 4.9 goalkeepers. I think it is worth to actually spend that sort of money to get the upgrade that is Pope. Mendy is someone who also rises because I do think that Potter will do better, and especially with his sea of green fixtures coming after the Liverpool game, I do think this Chelsea team could be getting some more clean sheets. So if, let's say, you aren't planning to wildcard anytime soon, you want to capitalize on a keeper who could do well in this short-term fixture swing, potentially Mendy might be the one that you go for if you really don't want to go for Pope for whatever reason. But that's pretty much the landscape of the goalkeepers. And that's going to be this week's cheat sheet. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.